guys to today's lecture. My name is Dariusz, as probably you know. Today I'm gonna talk about one opening which is pretty rare, rarely met on top level. Still it happens, but it's kind of rare, and it's usually chosen by players who play with black pieces when they try to avoid mainstream theory after 1d4. So I think this opening is pretty interesting, and I myself employed it in few games, especially lately. And if white doesn't know how to do it, like, games can be pretty actually short, as we'll see in one of the several examples, one of examples. So in general, I think it's a pretty interesting opening, and I want to share it with you guys what can happen there. So let's get started. D4, D6. So what's the idea? It's basically, as for a starter, I have to say about this that the idea of D4, D6 is mostly used against players who play only 1d4. And they do not play rather 1e4, and that's kind of like the main premise, I would say, because what's going on? Because basically D4, D6 allows rather comfortable control over the center of e4, right? And this is sort of a problem about this opening, but again, it is aimed mostly against players who do not play e4. And of course, if you play d1, d4, d6, you have to be ready what to do after e4, and there are several possibilities. One of the possibilities is playing simply g6, and either invite kings in with c4, bishop g7, or go for sort of pirk with without knight f6, or delay at least knight f6. So there's one possibility. Second possibility is to play classical pirk, which is basically the most common approach here, because right now after g6, especially against players who do not play e4, who don't play e4, right now this pawn c2 is kind of backward, and normally white players would like to have it on c4, those who play d4 only. And here we enter pirk, which is lots of theory, and maybe white is not ready for this. And third possibility is to play after knight c3, move e5, which transfers to Philidor, which also is a possibility against players who not necessarily play e4. Not saying those openings are great, they equalize, but they are possible, and sometimes whenever white is not ready for those openings, meaning when they play only 1d4, they don't play 1e4, it could be a good try to basically use the move order to start with d4, d6, and that's the main idea. So d4, d6. So assuming we're playing against a player who plays only 1d4, we sort of can say or assume that e4 is not going to happen, but there are several other possibilities. And one possibility, the most common, two most common, they're equally common, is 2c4 and knight f3. So let's talk about at first knight f3. So if knight f3, black can play knight f6, and here we enter sort of King's Indian style positions. However, with the serious distinction comparing to, let's say, classical move order, which would be, let's say, d4, knight f6, c4, g6. The thing is that after right now c4, for example, g6, knight c3, there's alternative of playing move bishop f5, and the idea is to simply stop move e4. And this is quite a rare. I mean, actually, this is quite a rare option here for black. It's much less common than classical King's Indian. However, it is playable, and I saw many games of Fabiano Caruana playing this line. I think twice he played against Varakobian, and also many other grandmasters played it as well. I haven't gotten to try this myself with black pieces, exactly this line. However, I tried something similar, so we'll talk about it later. So bishop f5. The idea is simply to stop e4 and classical King's Indian setup, and if white tries to play e4 anyway somehow, like by playing with, let's say, knight hg5 or knight h4, the knight is sort of a little bit odd on those squares, and maybe black can sort of take advantage of that. So that's the kind of main idea. So in this position, there are several possibilities for white. I didn't cover all of them because it's quite a huge line. The most important, I think, to be familiar with ideas rather than exact lines. So in this position, there are lots of possibilities. One of the main ones would be, let's say, queen b3, because bishop escape, bishop moves from c8, makes sense to attack with pawn b7. And right now, I really like the approach that I saw in the game of Alex Ipatov, who played move b6 in this position. And the idea of b6 is seemingly it weakens the, queen side, and these light squares are pretty kind of like exposed. But I don't see exactly the way to exploit that for white. For instance, g3 makes sense to right now develop this bishop on this diagonal because those squares are weak, so it makes sense to bring this bishop there. I should put it like this. So black plays knight c6 right now, bishop g2, and simply bishop g7. And actually there is no way to make kind of like take advantage of this loose knight on c6, because knight h4 always, first of all, knight takes d4, but also I can always, if I want to be super safe, play bishop d7. But knight takes d4, of course, is much stronger. So in the game happened between Mikhail Michelishvili and Alexander Ipatov, was queen a4, bishop d7, queen d1, short castle, short castle. And here we get to play e5. So here is another benefit, let's say, of playing, let's say, this line of bishop f5. Sometimes we may transfer to lines with King's Indian, sort of, with g3. And not everyone plays King's Indians with g3. Sometimes people play, I don't know, Zemish. Sometimes they play maybe Averbach, maybe the classical main line with e4, knight f3, bishop e2, maybe h3. Here we got to, for instance, to line with g3, which is maybe not in the repertoire. So therefore, by using this move order of d6, we can sort of trick our opponent to playing positions which are still familiar to us, but not necessarily for our opponent. So that's the kind of main idea right now. d5, it happened in this game, and right now Alex Ipatov played knight d7. Alternative would be knight a5. Both moves are playable. Idea of knight a5 could be knight b7, then a5, knight c5. Also could be an idea to play right now a6 and b5, and with the knight from a5 attack this pawn on c4. However, knight d7 is very logical too, because after e4, even though Alex didn't play it, he played queen c8, but I think knight e8 here, with idea of h6 and f5 is pretty standard plan for black. And actually move b6 is rather helpful for black, because it stops any sort of like c5 ideas and so on, stabilizes the queen side for sure. So I think position is pretty much unbalanced. There are all pieces on the board, and considering that our opponent may not be ready for let's say this type of position, we may have as black good chances to win the game, or create some chances for ourselves in the future stages, because we simply would be better off at the start, right? So yeah, this would be this for queen b3, for instance. Queen c8 is alternative, but I don't like it as much. Another idea is, let's say, for white would be to challenge the bishop on f5 immediately, because if white doesn't challenge the bishop in any way, we can just play bishop g7, short castle, and if white not play e4, with this certain achievement by black to not allow such simple control over the center with e4. So knight h4 and knight g5 are alternatives that I would consider as sort of the most challenging. But okay, let's talk about knight g5 if it's already on the board. Knight g5, bishop d7, because right now we have to acknowledge that we can't stop e4, but bishop d7, so we have to play bishop d7 sooner or later. We have to retreat with this bishop, and if after e4 we can play right now e5. And here is one of the benefits why we played this idea of bishop f5, because knight on g5 right now is not ideally placed. Probably has to go back at some point to f3, but if we go knight f3 back, this kind of like loses the tempi. So it's not optimal as well. And if d5, trying to keep this knight on g5, this on the other hand, it closes the center too early, and we can play bishop g7, let's say a5. We do not have to castle yet. There are certain positions where black can postpone castling and maybe play quickly for f5. and you know, we can just delay it for later, and we can see what white is doing meantime. Knight a6, knight c5 could be definitely one of the ideas right now for black. So I analyze also f4, which is a move to which tries to stop e5, but it also leads to very unclear and unbalanced positions, because bishop g7, bishop I mean e4, and now e5 as well happens. After f takes e5, d takes e5, it seems like white can just win a pawn after d takes e5, but indeed, in reality, it doesn't lead to anything special. So I think that d5 would be a better try. Just to quickly show what happens after d takes e5, there was a game Kramnik versus Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, and there happened knight g4, e6, bishop e6, queen takes d8, king takes d8. True, our king on d8 is, you know, cannot castle anymore, but on the other hand, in exchange we got a perfect square for our knight on e5, and here definitely black is not worse, I would say, because of such powerful knight on e5. So therefore d5 I thought it was a better try, but again knight a6, and here we get, like, you know, some sorry, not bishop d3, I want to say bishop e2, h6, let's say knight f3, simply knight c5, queen c2, queen e7. We got some, you know, unbalanced position where both sides have some chances pretty much. Like it's not like typical King's Indian. Right now f and d pawns are traded. Maybe as black we can play a5. I mean, a5 is definitely one of the moves, and maybe then we can try to bring our knight to d6 by, let's say, playing short castle. One of the ideas would be, let's say, an idea knight d6, and then try to play for f5. It could be one of the ideas. Of course, by us playing first a5, because we need to control b4. So this could be a possibility. So, but the question is, what happens after b4 immediately? Because it seems like we are just losing a piece. Or if we go knight a6, our knight is very passive there. So here is the thing. Here we go knight takes e4. There are such ideas as well, and f5. We simply go for immediate counterplay, and after queen h4 we can play e4, and we are getting back the piece, and we certainly do not have any problems. As let's say rook b1, we can just take back the piece. This endgame is not any better at all for white. I think position just around equal. Just to show it, rook b1, let's say takes. We can play as black. Maybe, I mean, king f7 looks good, rook e8 looks good. But let's say this is looking very natural as well. So I think position just, you know, pretty good for black. So this is all of such ideas are possible, and it is not entirely easy for white to prove like any serious advantage. One of the best tries, I think, would be also knight h4, and after bishop d7 then e4. But again, knight on h4 is also not a great piece. We can play either through e5 or maybe through bishop g7, and then e5. Both approaches are pretty valid. After this knight c6, I saw some games of I think it was Fabiano Caruana who played knight c6 here, d5, knight d7. And again, we got sort of King's Indian style position, but we have this bishop on d7, which is already there, which in many lines can be simply helpful. So we got sort of King's Indian tempi up. Maybe it's not necessary, but sometimes, maybe it's not relevant, but maybe sometimes in some particular lines it could be really useful. So it's not entirely, you know, that, you know, white has nice center and that's, you know, it's all everything great. There are some chances for black for sure. Another possibility is to also play bishop g7, which is this kind of similar positions with e5. Knight from h4 has to go back to f3 at some point, and this again results in King's Indian with tempi up for black essentially. So it can't be bad. So yeah, this would be basically covered. This would cover pretty much like one of the, let's say, main, or like, you know, one of the many, let's say, logical, let's say, human level, let's say, approaches here by white. There are also others. There's h3, which is very interesting and challenging. There is e3. There is d5, what Varakovian played, I remember. Bishop g5 also is interesting. g3 transferring to the King's Indian with g3 also is possible. So covering all of that would take really, like, I could just spend on this position just and all my time, but like, you know, I want to cover all 1d4, d6. So I think this gives already a good picture what to expect here as black. And we can move on to the next variation which I prepared, which is let's say if white plays with g3. And we could, there's different move orders. White could start with c4, g6, knight c3, bishop f5, g3, or like this, g3 immediately. g6, bishop g7, and short castle, c4, c6. And yeah, I mean, by the way, in this position, black has a number of possibilities. This is essentially king's ending with g3, right? But following the same suit as earlier, we should, I would suggest playing c6, knight c3, bishop f5. It is a pretty interesting line. And I think that objectively white should be somewhat better here, but it's never easy to prove it. It's never easy to prove it. White, black has certain dynamics always that prove that in my experience at least shows that, you know, black has good chances to equalize, and not only equalize but also fight for the initiative in the future. So here there are lots of possibilities for white. There's possibility again to play with knight g5. Also there are possibilities like knight e1. Knight h4 right now makes, also is possible, but makes a little bit less sense if knight e1 is alternative, because knight e1 is closer to the center. And finally, some call move like b3 is also possible. However, one of the most important things I would like to point out is what happens after rook e1. After rook e1, black's main move is always knight e4. And the idea is to trade those knights and try to bring this bishop to e4 and then simplify the position. And most importantly, control this e4 pawn push. So let's discuss what after b3. And here again, same idea, knight e4. Bishop b2, and now, as I said, takes, and now bishop e4. This is exactly what black should do here. And right now, black has a number of ideas. One of the ideas is to play knight d7, the knight f6. Another possibility is to play simply through d5. Another possibility is to maybe prepare c5 and knight c6 at some point. Or maybe prepare e5 breakthrough at some point as well. It could be possible. However, the last one with the e5 is much less common. The most popular is, let's say, knight d7, knight f6, maybe through d5. This I would probably expect here the most. As the knights are already traded, usually in King's Indian we always suffer from lack of space. Here, because knights are already traded, it means that we have more space for our pieces, so it shouldn't be dangerous, you know, the fact that white has a little bit more space right now because knights are already traded. So I want to discuss in particular move knight g5 because I felt like it's should be at least the most dangerous. You know, if knight g5, then e4, challenging this bishop from f5, building very strong center very quickly. Seems very logical. And here the modern theory suggests move e5, and I really like it. Idea of e5 is that, okay, right now white has essentially two moves, either takes e5 or d5. If d5, black can play with a5, and the idea is to play through play through knight a6 at some point after first taking on d5. And you know, maybe if this e4 happens, then we can bring our bishop back to d7 and support b5. So essentially, by expanding on the queen side. For example, e4, bishop g4, queen b3. If f3, we simply go back to d7, as I was saying. Knight on g5, we can see it's kind of not great, and we can play c takes d5 in the future, knight d6, b5, and stuff like that. This could be one of our ideas. If queen b3. Again, now we can just ignore his pawn on b7. Knight 6, queen b7 would be really, really dangerous to take such pawn. Black would have at least somewhere perpetual, but probably white is risking that this queen would be simply trapped. For example, if queen takes b7, I'll play knight c5, queen takes c6, and right now the move I would play is probably rook a6 because it hits the queen. If the queen goes here, we can simply move back our bishop, and the queen has nowhere actually to go already. So that's why white cannot take this pawn b7, and so bishop e3. But then we can take, and again bishop d7. Considering the fact that again knight on g5 is a little bit awkward and gives black additional 10 pieces. So right now knight g4 could be a threat. And if knight goes back, there are ideas of b5 as well. So maybe queen also by preparing it with queen b8. So if we now queen takes b7, knight b4, this queen is a little bit also like off on b7. While black should have always some compensation considering like moves like knight c2, knight g4, or rook b8. There should be always plenty of counterplay for black, and I do not think that white has any advantage here. Probably even just black has great game here. So in my game that happened like some time ago, it was d takes e5, d takes e5, queen b3, and I think that after queen 7 we simply have great already position as black. Rook d1, and right now, even though I made a mistake because I played move h6, this is a mistake. Unfortunately, it was a blitz game. It was titled Tuesday, but anyway, knight b7 is a very simple move. It prepares h6 in the future. So idea is also knight c5. Black has simply great position. And I played, unfortunately, h6, which I had similar idea. I want to simply take and then play knight a6 and prepare f5, e4, knight c5. But unfortunately, because of bishop e3, the knight is not really getting to c5 square, and I think white should be somewhat better. And also, the problem is that if f5, the c5 can follow, and you know, bishop, let's say if I go king h7, bishop d3, knight on a6 could be a problem sometimes. Still, position is pretty unclear, but white can in general should be in general somewhat better here. In the game happened bishop g2, but here I solve quickly my problems. I brought my knight to e6, f5, e4 follows. I think only black can be better here objectively. So in the game followed like something like this. We traded even the rooks, even the bishops, and in this position only, if anyone could be better, it will be only black, because knight and queen are usually cooperate much better than queen and bishop. And also I have access to squares like c5, for instance. I control the d file, and I have simply more space right now because my pawn is already on e4. So this, let's say, typical plan right now from black. And so it means that this idea of d takes e5 is not really also dangerous. So yeah, like finally, let's discuss move knight e1 here. And after knight e1, like this position knight e1, also preparing e4. And for many long time, I thought that bishop e6 should be played here. And the idea is that simply after b3, d5 could be, sort of like try to exploit this knight on e1, which is very passive. However, the modern theory is also possible. I'm not saying it's impossible, but modern theory suggests e5. And after e5, again, same thing happens after knight g5. Knight on e1 is not a great piece. We immediately challenge the center. After d5, we can play cd, cd, and now a5. And this is what Fabiano Caruana lately played in some games. And again, the idea is that this knight on e1 sort of like is not great, and we want to play as black knight a6, bishop d7, and finally b5. There have been some the theoretical developments in this position. I think personally that black has a pretty good game. Even though white may be objectively still somewhat better, black has easier game, I would say. So I do not think that black. I mean, I think that black has pretty good chances here. So coming back to d4, d6. This is what happens when white plays move knight f3 and knight f6, right? We play. I suggest playing through bishop f5 in order not to allow, let's say, c4, in order not to allow to build very strong center with e4. And this is, let's say, one line, one thing that white can do. However, there is we have to remember also there is c4 possible, right? So what happens after c4? Right now, if we play like knight f6, bishop f5, white knight is not on f3 anymore, right? So if let's say this would be pretty suspicious, I have a feeling, because this knight is on f3. So let's say if f3, we can build very quickly Zemish system with several extra tempis for white, which makes pretty much absolutely no sense for black to go for something like this. Therefore, in this position, I suggest to play move e5. And this is the drawback of c4, that this e5 right now move challenging the center is possible. So what to do here as white? There are several possibilities. First thing, it is possible to enter the endgame. D takes e5, D takes e5, queen takes d8, king takes d8. For example, this position, right? So, do we have to be worried about here with black about this endgame? And I would say not really. Like I think if anything, white only black. Okay, position is equal. I have to say position is equal, true. But if anyone has great, let's say, or more like better perspectives here in this endgame, it would be black. For a simple reason: pawn on c4. Pawn on c4 is misplaced. It would be better if this pawn actually on c2, because but unfortunately pawns do not move backward, right? So the point is that why pawn on c4 gives some sort of maybe edge for white in such endgame is that black has access to, let's say right now, or easier access at least to squares like c5 or in general dark squares on the queen side. And this king on d8 doesn't matter as this kind of castle. This black king can also only plays like c6, king c7, and this king would be totally safe. Also, bishop e6, knight d7 is also a legit approach here as black, and there is no way to exploit this king on d8, which cannot castle, because black king will certainly be safe on either queen side or back on the king side. As in an endgame, the king's position, the fact that the king cannot castle doesn't quite matter in my opinion. And so yeah, here about this endgame, I wouldn't really worry as black. And indeed, I got to play one game in this such endgame, and I managed to win the game. I will not show this game because it was very long, but I didn't have any problems out of the opening, and indeed, in the end, I got after move I'm like number 20 or something. I had already great position with good winning chances. But okay. I'm just trying to say that this endgame is not really dangerous for black, and it potentially can become even better for black. So d takes e5 I wouldn't worry about. So there's three other possibilities. There is move knight f3, there is move knight c3, and there is move d5. Also there are other moves like e3, but you know they are kind of passive. Also e4 is possible, but is also not the most common move here. Usually white tries to improve the center or like strengthen the center by playing knight f3 or knight c3, or close up the center by playing d5. So let's see what happens after d5 at first. D5 has this drawback that it immediately shows what's happening, or like closes the center and defines the pawn structure in the center. With the structure, with such structure which is already defined, black has number of possibilities to how to put pieces. There is possibility to delay again castle. There is possibility to somehow trade dark square bishops, because we have to acknowledge that bishop on f8 is right now not great. If bishop was on c5, it would be of course very good bishop, but on f8 is kind of attacking its own pawns, which is not ideal. However, if we can, let's say, bring this bishop, let's say bishop e7, bishop g5 was one idea. Another idea would be to play g6, bishop h6, also to trade this bishop. So it's all possible because this knight from g8 didn't develop yet. And also, another thing is that black can quickly start playing with f5 is also a possibility. Another possibility is at first black can start controlling the c5 square. So in general, what I played, I think, two of my games. I played immediately a5, not declaring yet what I'm doing with my pieces on the king side, but at first making sure that I control the queen side. So not knight c3, knight a6. And I'm not sure which path I'm gonna take on the king side, because it depends also on what white is doing. For example, if e4, I think that pretty good move is to play g6, because I combine both idea of bishop h6 and also trying to play for f5. So there is white is of course huge choice. I don't want to go into details in particular lines, but I just want to show more like ideas what black does here. So let's say h3, which happened in one of my games. So right now I analyze that f5 is actually a very interesting try. And after e takes f5, bishop takes f5, g4, bishop d7. White has nice control over the e4 square, but black hasn't, developed this bishop from f8 yet. We can play bishop h6 very quickly. Also, white is a little bit behind in the development of pieces. So I think that like bishop g7, also if we don't go even bishop h6, we can play bishop g7, knight f6, and maybe trying to play through e4 also would be, quite okay. So this is one possibility. Second possibility is what I chose in this game, and I like it also a lot. I play move h5, and the idea here is, first of all, to stop any sort of g4 moves from white to the expanding on the king side, and also I'm preparing move bishop h6. And after knight f3, bishop h6, bishop e2, I simply took, and now I play knight f6. I could consider already playing f5 or something, but the point is, it doesn't quite run away, and I decided to at first improve my knight, and I want to play knight c5 as well. So short castle makes sense. I play knight c5. Right now, opponent e4 is hanging. My opponent played knight g5. Knight on g5 is a decent knight right now, because it supports on the pawn on e4, and I cannot kick it out with move h6. So I just decided to try it with knight h7, takes, and here I think position is just around equal. I do not see any problems here for black. One of the ideas for black is, of course, to finally get to play f5. But what is the most important, in normal King's Indian, let's say, positions, something like this is pretty much not attainable. Here we got it after move number already 12. And this is much better version of what happens in King's Indian, because black already traded dark square bishops and traded one pair of knights. So the fact that white has a little bit more space here thanks to those pawns, I should also point this one as well. So white has more, let's say, better control over the center, more space, but it's pretty much irrelevant, because what space is about pieces, and right now black's pieces have lots of room, and yeah, like there is no any reason why black should be worried here. It's, I think, perfect version of sort of King's Indian structure. So in my game happened f4, which tries to immediately trying to challenge the center, trying to take advantage of my awkward rook on h7, king still on e8, but it simply doesn't work. So what I would probably here play as white would be knight a4, but such moves are also not easy, and the knight e4 would lead to some complications which are possible, but pretty much with this rook on h7 not really necessary. Even if I can, for example, even if I play move b6, takes, queen d2, queen f6, there is no any reason for black to be worried about. Without dark square bishop, and potentially playing through g5, maybe just bishop d7, then king e7, preparing maybe f5 sometimes. I think black has pretty good position. So, but in the game happened f4, and after f4, e takes f4, rook takes f4. I could have won the game actually immediately with bishop takes h3, which is what I kind of like. I think I saw it, I had to see it, but just by some reason I thought it would be the same thing if I play queen g5. Also, it was a rapid game, I think, so or blitz, I don't remember. So I just want to play something quickly. So queen g5 I've played, but my opponent played queen f1, allowing me finally to play bishop h3, and the game is pretty much over. Rook f3 would be better, but after bishop d7, black is anyway much better, because of course queen comes to e5. Control over the dark squares is clearly in black's favor, and black is simply much better here. So I wouldn't criticize myself too much over not playing bishop h3, because queen g5 also leads to huge advantage, positional advantage. But after queen f1, bishop h3, the game is just pretty much over, because I just win a pawn. Also bishop takes g2, as happened in this game, follows, and this is just pretty much over, and this is how the game ended. So this is, let's say, one example of what can happen after d5. Another possibility is to play with bishop d3. After bishop d3, while black can play simply bishop h6, and let's save knight d2, takes, knight f6, and again, similar stuff, right? We go knight c5, we can go through h5, knight g3, knight c5, bishop b1, again h5, idea is to play h4. Pretty much what I'm trying to say is all of it is better version of regular King's Indian. If white only plays d5 too early. After h4, bishop d7, yeah, like queen d2 happened in my game. I play simply a short castle. I want to at some point prepare move f5, f3. Okay, now knight h7, pawn h4 is a little bit loose. It cannot, white cannot castle. Knight d1, queen f6. Idea could be to play queen g7 and then prepare maybe f5 at some point. I play queen g7, knight d3, trying to finally trade this knight, but I play b6, b3, and simply finally f5. This was my idea all the way along. So takes, bishop takes f5, and white cannot take, bishop takes f5, g takes f5, knight takes h5, because queen g6 simply loses a piece. Just to show it quickly, queen g6 simply loses a piece, or like, if not a piece, then some material, because this is simply crushing. I can simply take it here, and white's position is very, very bad, because king is also very weak, my king is much safer. Also, what I'm talking about, queen e4 is even stronger here. Queen e4 actually wins the rook on the spot. So white cannot do this. White cannot do this. White has to play bishop e4, but after bishop e4 takes, and rook f4. I challenge the knight from e4 somehow by playing either knight f6, but knight f6 in some positions, because I have to worry about knight g5. But mostly what I want to do here as black is to play move g5. For instance, after queen e3, rook f8, a4. Not a great move, but yeah. Anyway, black is better. After a4, simply g5, black has great chances to win this, and I eventually went on winning the game. So therefore, in this position, d5 is not really a pretty dangerous line for black as well. It may be tempting to play for white, because it just gains more space, gains some control over the center and so on, but it gives huge room for flexibility in terms of choice of setups for black, and I don't think it is really a problem here for black here. So other two possibilities I consider here as the the most, let's say, challenging or the most interesting, or simply what white should do, is either knight c3 or knight f3. And let's talk briefly about knight f3. After knight the point of, in general, d6, e5, is that after knight f3, black can quickly play move e4. And this already creates sort of imbalance in the position, because this gives possibility for black to gain control over the center and expand, and pretty much gain some space on the king side. And if this is, if something like this is possible, black should generally go for it. Of course, I'm not saying that this is, already black is better or something. Position is still very, dynamic, and still anything can happen. But I personally like this position for black, and I will just share some ideas what can happen here. And knight g5 is logical to make, it's the most active move after all. Change this pawn e4, now f5. We need to support this pawn and build very strong center. Knight c3 and bishop e7. And right now, white has several, white has essentially two moves possible, knight h3 or h4. After a move like h4, I would consider a move like knight f6. And again, we as black right now, we want to simply play very often short castle, c6, and sometimes even want to play move d5. But we can prepare d5 in, depending on what white does. And the point is, in general, to build strong center and gain some space, which is following, the basic principles of of playing in the opening, right? So it is logical, definitely logical approach here as black. And there have been many moves. One of the moves is g3 or e3, but after both of them, black would play c6. And then again, we want to play short castle. We want to keep the knight from g5 out. For instance, after, let's say, bishop e2 makes some sense. Let's say short castle. Maybe, I don't know, b3 makes sense to develop this bishop to b2. As black, we can consider playing with like h6. We can consider it. And then after knight h3, maybe bishop e6 or something. However, this weakens, you know, this king side a little bit. Now h5, knight f4 would be great for white, right? Therefore, we should probably move knight a6. This is one of the typical ideas in this opening. Bishop b2 and maybe knight c7. If white wants to go back, white is more than welcome to move retreat with this knight. And after this, we can play already bishop e6 if we want to. And after knight f4, bishop f7, developing our bishop. And again, right now we want to play move d5, building, you know, very strong center here with black pieces. And d5 is possible, true, as well, but it also is not right, like, you know, really dangerous, I guess, because we can play with knight, like knight d7, knight d5, or we can play maybe even c5 if we want to. There's no need to play c5. I'll probably play just knight d7 if h5 simply knight d5 or bishop f6. Both moves are interesting. Position is very complicated, and both sides definitely have its own chances. I wouldn't, you know, say that white or black is better. Position is pretty unclear, but as black, you know, if we want to avoid, let's say, mainstream theory, let's say Nims or Indian, or mainstream, you know, King's Indian or Grunfeld, like if we can get something playable like this, definitely is the opening success. So other possibility is to play g3, and let's say after c6, knight h3, knight a6, similar stuff happens. Knight c7, short castle. Position is pretty much unbalanced. Again, bishop e6, bishop f7 could be an idea, aiming to play d5 in the future. Personally, I like black's chances. So knight f3 allows to build this strong center with e4. So therefore, I think that black has, you know, decent position here. One more thing I wanted to point out: if white doesn't play h4, if white plays knight h3. Again, knight f6. This is even probably worse version of this for white, because white cannot get to f4 square, but it has this kind of like compensation in terms of the fact that king side is not really weakened and white wants to play through f3. But f3 is not really a problem as long as we can play always d5. So therefore, this idea I don't think is quite really, you know, dangerous for black. Of course, I'm not saying black is worse. White can play, let's say, d5 and then play f3 or something. It's still okay. But d5 also weakens e5 square, so we can play then b7, knight d5. There are some trade-offs that have to be considered, and in overall, I wouldn't say that black is worse here. For instance, after short castle, I analyzed knight d7, which is a pretty rare move, but it just underlines black's main idea here, to play d5, and black can achieve that by playing after f3, knight b6, b3, and finally d5. And I don't see any problems here for black. For instance, if c5, knight b6, knight bd7, knight f4, simply knight b8, covering e6 square, and this line perfectly illustrates black's main strategical objective, which was to create a very strong center. And right now with pawn c6, d5, e4, f5, just mark them, black achieved that. So if black can achieve can get such strong center, potentially in the future, black has better chances of, you know, winning the game, or like at least getting some advantage and good chances, because strategically position is very sound. So yeah, this will be it, I think, about move knight f3. Finally, let's discuss move knight c3, which is very interesting as well. And yeah, let's just see what happens there. It takes knight c3, it takes d4. We have to right now take on d4, taking advantage of the fact that white has to take the queen on d4, which you know, queen d4, knight c6, queen runs into tempest. And the best move according to modern theory is to play with queen d2. And the point is, white's in general plan here in this position is to play, you know, there are actually two plans, or actually even three plans. One plan is to play simply e4, develop quickly bishop d3, knight d2, or knight f3, and you know, build sort of this strong center of pawns e4 and c4. This is one plan. Second plan would be to play b3 and bishop b2, develop this bishop on this diagonal, and then decide whether to play through g3 or e4. And in general, after b3, bishop b2, usually the move is to which white goes for is move knight d5. at least the move that white has to consider. And then also white can decide whether to go with g3 or e3. Both are possible. And finally, the setup for white will be the final setup for white will be to play through g3 and then bishop g2, and sort of put this bishop on this long diagonal and play sort of typical, let's say, King's Indian position with after trade on d4 with bishop on g2, which on this diagonal is usually well placed. So right now black should play with knight f6, and the thing about this position, in particular about this position, is that black hasn't declared yet where this bishop from e8 is going to be developed. There is possibility that this bishop may stay on this diagonal f8, a3, or a3, f8, or it can be developed to g7 by playing g6, bishop g7. But the point is that we are not declaring what we're going to do as black yet. And white has to figure out and has to make some choice. And it is not entirely easy to show, or first of all, I think black is doing well here, but also it's not easy to choose for the setup for white. For example, if white plays move like which to start with? Which one should I start with? Let's start with e4. Let's say if e4. We cannot forget that this queen on d2 is a little bit odd, and usually in such positions white knight should be on d4, queen on d1, right? So we got some time here for some dynamics, for some dynamic play with black. So here I would suggest going for sort of g6 and bishop g7 in, let's say, King's Indian setup. Let's say bishop d3. Alternative would be, let's say, to play b3. After bishop g7, bishop b2, this bishop on b2 is aiming to neutralize the bishop on g7. And here we go short castle. The point, I mean, the idea right now for black is because we have to see that black has advantage in development of pieces, right? And with such advantage, black has to play very dynamically, because if only white manages to develop all the pieces, strategically white will be better because of the more space, better control over the center. Black pieces will run out of will sort of be experiencing lack of space. So having said that, black has to play very dynamic chess right now. So after bishop d3, this move makes lots of sense because it tries to develop this knight to e2, let's say, and then short castle, then maybe knight d5, try to get let's say some nice positional advantage. And this is a valid approach as well for white, but while black can react by playing move a6. And this is the dynamics I'm talking about. White is not in time to quickly develop those pieces without black getting a counterplay. After knight g2, knight d5, short castle. Similarly, white achieved everything great, and next knight d5 is coming. White has great strategic advantage. However, black can play already move b5, and this is where this dynamic factor comes into play. Black, thanks to the dynamic play, black has really good chances to play this even for a win. So suddenly, what's the point? And this idea of a6 b5 is very common in this type of positions, especially where white has sort of delayed development of the king side and still has to catch up on. Black will have very often time for such activity. So similarly, we're just giving the pawn, right? But indeed, it's an interesting pawn sacrifice. C takes b5, knight takes d3, queen takes d3, a takes b5. If knight takes b5, simply c6. And we have pair of bishops, and thanks to bishop on c8 still, we can open this diagonal. We can bring this bishop to a6, where it will be doing lots of harm to white. Knight c3 should be played, because if knight c3, bishop a6 would actually win a piece, because those knights are pretty loose, and white simply loses the piece. Just to show, for example, if queen, let's say d1, let's say take, and e5 is met by queen e6, and finally queen on e2 is not protected. So white cannot take on f6. So if knight bc3, then rook e8 first, And the idea is to, at some point probably to play bishop a6 and d5 and challenge white center. Essentially, I think black has great compensation here for the sacrificed pawn. For example, queen c2, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop takes b2, queen takes b2, rook takes e4, black can already win the pawn back. And I'm not saying black is better, but definitely not worse. For instance, knight c3, queen f6, rook d1, d5. Like, no any problems here for black. And bishop may prove, because position is quite open, may in the future, of course, it's very hypothetical, may prove stronger than the knight. As I say, it's hypothetical, may, doesn't have to, position is still around equal, but probably I would choose here, if I have to choose sides, I would probably choose black in this position. Nonetheless, position is pretty equal. Alright, so after short castle, there is bishop d3, which is a move which we just discussed. Alternative would be, let's say, to play f3, and after f3, this move again stabilizes the center, because pawn e4 could be always some sort of object of an attack. And right now we look for counterplay in different way. We play a5, and the idea is to quickly challenge the queen side with the move a4. For instance, right now bishop d3, knight d5, and even though we don't have a6, b5 right now, we can play through a4. This is one, let's say, idea. Another possibility in this particular instance would be bishop h6, which, you guys can see that with this king on e1, white king on e1, there is lots of activity for black, lots of dynamic possibilities for black to, use and, disrupt easy development playing for the space advantage. I especially want to show what happens after a4, because this is very interesting. After knight takes a4, rook takes a4, pawn takes, knight takes e4. All sort of tactics like this already works. Pawn takes e4, knight takes d3, takes, rook b1, bishop e5. And we got this position where white has just, extra exchange, but black has huge compensation in the form of two bishops, pair of bishops, and great control over the e5 square, and really powerful bishop on e5. I don't think black objectively, from practical, let's say, point of view, takes any risk here. I think black is just doing great here. Maybe black is not better, but definitely not worse. Great compensation. So this idea of e4 and runs into g6, and suddenly we can see that white is simply not quite in time to develop, actually, I didn't say about bishop d3, but after b3, white is simply not in time to quickly develop the pieces and finish the development, because black always has some dynamics. So after e4, g6, there's bishop d3 also move, and here we can play bishop g7, and again we can go for similar stuff, a6, and idea is to play b5 at some point. And the problem is that queen on d2 disturbs this bishop from c1, and it's not easy to actually play right now queen d1, because queen d1, okay, knight d5, and okay, I win the pair of bishops. I would definitely not have any problems here with black. So if b3, at least just trying to justify is queen on d2, but again we can play b5 and now knight b4. Also knight d5 could be possible, I guess, but knight b4 is probably even stronger. Black has similar idea. We aim for dynamics, and black generally should do quite well here. So having said that, let's go back to position after queen 2 and knight f6. In this position, there are also two other possibilities for white, and one is to play b3, one is to play g3. I want to talk at first quickly about b3. After b3, black should play a5. Again, if we play passively, like bishop e7, short castle or something, black while we're able to develop nicely all the pieces and have an advantage. If we play very dynamic chess with a5, we immediately want to play a4. After bishop b2, a4, suddenly it could be not so easy. And the thing is that knight takes a4 may run into moves like d5, and suddenly we are not developing this bishop from f8 to g7, but we go with this bishop to b4, and considering this lack of development of the king side, we are sacrificing the pawn, true, but we are getting huge, let's say, activity and great play in the center. This could end game on this, and end the game on this bishop before diagonal very quickly. This is very dangerous. For example, let's say the line I can see right now, I didn't analyze it too deeply, but what I can see and I would consider is something like this: bishop b4 and knight d4, and black wins. So this is very, very dangerous on this diagonal, and considering how quickly black pieces can join the game and attack. So white cannot, I think, take this pawn on a4, but if plays, let's say, rook d1, a takes b3, a takes b3, we can already see that our rook on a is perfectly placed. Whenever this knight goes from d5, we can at least consider moves like rook a2 or something. Not saying this would be great, but at least we have active rook and we can take advantage of that. So right now, I analyze move g6, finally switching back to regular development because everything in the center is controlled. But let's say after knight d5, bishop g7, I don't see any problems here for black. Thanks to very active pieces, very quick development, I think that black is doing simply great. For instance, after queen g5, black has a choice either to play for simple equality with knight takes d5 and go for such endgame, which is around equal. I don't see any problems here for black. Or play something more ambitious like knight h5 after queen takes d8, king takes d8. This is actually just much better because rook a3 is coming, and black has huge the advantage in development of pieces. So if queen e3, bishop b6, this also leaves black with great chances because black has simply better already castled. Black's king is safe, white king is still in the center. Knight f5 is coming, maybe bishop takes d5, maybe then queen f6. Bunch of possibilities for black, and it is white who has to be really careful here. So this idea of b3 is not particularly dangerous in my opinion, because of this a5, a4. This is very important to remember. This, if b3, then a5, a4 immediately puts pressure on the queen side, and if knight takes a4, ideas of d5 always are there, right? So this is a very important thing to know and remember. So finally, let's discuss what happens after g3. And g3, I think, is okay. G3 is also possible but right now we go bishop e6. We do not develop g6, bishop g7 because we can at first attack this pawn on c4, which is we can attack it, right? So bishop e6. And right now in my game, against Aditya Mittal, which was played on Title Tuesday, white played e3. My opponent played e3, which is actually a huge mistake. Probably just losing mistake. White should have played move knight d5, and here black has several possibilities. One possibility is to play knight e5, and second possibility is to play g6. But considering knight already on d5, let's say bishop g2, bishop g7, knight h3, short castle, knight f4, bishop d7. It's not ideal setup for white. This with knight on f4, because knight f3, it's kind of leaving this knight. I mean, it's not like it's a bad move, but it doesn't support this knight on d5 so well. So pawn on d5 could be object of some attack in the future. Also, maybe even immediately. I would probably consider maybe taking this immediately and attacking his pawn, because I don't know how to defend this actually. Because if knight goes to d4, we can just probably take it. Knight g1, of course, is not a good move. Knight h4, knight g5 are also a little bit off. So it could be possible something like this. But even if knight bishop takes d5 is not possible, just short castle is totally fine. And the idea of knight e4, knight c5 is also decent. Also, maybe knight e5 as black at some point, probably later. Even just after this rook e8, it's not clear how white develops this bishop from c1, and I don't see any problems here for black. I think black has a really good game. Also possible is to play knight e5. In order not to go into too many details, I will just show what is the line here: c6, knight f6, the queen f6, bishop b2, and considering this threat of f4, we simply have to prevent it by playing with g5. Which is a very interesting novelty actually. and black plays bishop g7 next and puts some pressure on this bishop, on the diagonal, on this bishop on b2. For example, this, rook d1, knight d3 is already great for black. In general, position is good for black, but here black can win pair of bishops. So I think black is simply doing great here. So talking finally about this, let's get to my game with e3, and here is the main sort of idea of this line, to attack pawn on c4 and right now go for d5, because white is simply not in time to bring this bishop to g2, and you know, in this particular line. So white, in order to stop d5, white has to play move d5, knight d5, right? But because e3 runs into d5, and suddenly white is in huge trouble, because black has perfect development, and queen on d2 is very awkward. Bishop b4 idea is coming. It's very dangerous suddenly, and actually the game lasted only 15 moves. So I'll just quickly show it. C takes d5, knight takes d5, knight g2. Now I decided to play knight b4. Idea is knight d3. So knight f4. I decided to take bishop d2, knight c2 wins the rook. So king d2 has to be played, and now I think I played very strong move bishop g4. Preventing his king from going to this squares, and I want to go long castle as well. Knight b5, long castle, king c3, and simply g5. And the game is pretty much over. Bishop g7 is coming, pawn e4 is hanging, and the game happened this, and after rook d3, my opponent resigned because of king c4 is met by knight a5 checkmate, or knight e5 checkmate, right? So yeah, this is how the game ended. After rook d3, my opponent resigned. In general, this game shows that the danger that is around white in this line, especially when it's not when player with white is not really familiar with this stuff. So yeah, okay, this would be in general all for this lesson about this opening. I think it's a very interesting line for black to play. With correct play, white objectively should be somehow in some lines better, but nonetheless, black has really good counter chances, and I wouldn't say that that black is suffering there. Maybe objectively, white is slightly better, but black has its own chances too, and especially if we want to avoid theory after, let's say, d4, let's avoid, let's say, main King's Indian or Grunfeld or some Nimzo Indian or Slav or anything, and you just want to get something playable quickly, and your opponent doesn't play 1e4 but only 1d4. d4, d6 could be a good try and good opening to achieve that. So yeah, that's all from me for now, and I'll be back soon with the next lesson, which will be games of the week.